Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back to my channel. That is the first time that I have said those words in a red hot minute because I actually officially left the Australian outback, not even the Australian outback. I left Australia in general for an entire month, which is no small feat. It's not something that came about easy. It's actually a very, very big deal for me to leave not only the country, but my town as well, because as a stateless person, obviously I don't have a passport to just come and go as I wish. But I also cannot leave my town for longer than a week without court-mandated permission. So a judge needs to sign a form telling me that I'm free to leave. And so I thought that it was never going to happen. But when there is a will, there is a way. And I certainly had a lot of will in this specific scenario. And so A turned to B, and there was a lot of give and a lot of take, more give on my part than take, but nonetheless, it unraveled and unrolled exactly the way that I hoped that it would, and I got permission to leave. Nate, Ash, and I, the three of us all together, we went to America for an entire month, and it was absolutely glorious. It was everything that we wanted in a trip for the three of us to get away. Of course, that meant that the hospital, not so much the hospital, but very much the emergency room, had to close for the entire duration that we weren't there together, because it's really just the three of us who work in the emergency room, which was not so glorious for the locals, but one can only hope that in our absence, they have grown to appreciate us a little bit more and the work that we do. But honestly, I think that hope is probably in vain, but we shall see. It was good fun. It was real fun. It was the best of times. Sometimes it was the worst of times, but even that was an experience worth having, because it was an experience that the three of us thought we were never going to get, just on account of pure logistics. And all I can really do is extend my deepest and most sincere gratitude to both Hub SeaWorld Research Institute and the American Navy. Because when I say that I had to rely on the assistance of some very, very big dogs to fight my battles in order to get me over there, I am not lying. Because it was a total and complete nightmare of just bureaucracy and box ticking. And so fight my battles they did. Because we were supposed to go over Easter, at least Nate and I were supposed to go over Easter, and Nate actually did end up going over Easter. But my handlers wouldn't allow me to leave the country. And so even though that was the original plan that we had set in motion, they said no. And so it was just naturally no. And to be honest, the only reason that they relented this time is because the American Navy got involved. And so the Navy very valiantly fought my battle for me and won. And so in exchange for one single weekend in Melbourne before I left, I got to spend 4 whole weeks in America. And so I went to Melbourne for that one weekend right before I left, the week before I left, and it was boring as usual. I have nothing really to report on that. It's the first weekend that I've gone to Melbourne in a very, very, very long time. And yeah, that's my entire report on it, to be honest. There's nothing more to say. But we got the 4 weeks clearance. We got to go there. The deal was that I had to be in San Diego on the first weekend of July, which meant that we got to spend 4th of July in San Diego, which in and of itself was an experience, because that was really the main reason that we were going there in the first place, and really the main reason that the American Navy stepped in. It was, obviously not charity. It wasn't something that they were doing out of the goodness of their heart. No, we needed to be in San Diego on those specific dates because Nate and I have now officially, for real, for good, finished our orca research project. I have handed all my information, all my research, all my notes over to the powers that be. Nate has handed over the prototype tablet to some very clever people who can take it to the next stage that we do not currently have the resources or knowledge to take it to. While we were there, we got to go to SeaWorld and we got to meet all the trainers, and we got to spend some time with Keat in the medical pool, and I got to take some blood from Keat specifically, which was amazing because it's been a very, 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 very long time since I've been able to get up close and personal with an orca, and it's just something that never changes. It's such an incredible experience, and one that you can't really explain if you've never actually known an orca for yourself. It is an otherworldly experience. And so I was happy that I got to do that again, because again, it's been forever since I've touched an orca. And so I was thrilled to be able to do that. And then we also got to spend a day at the US Navy Marine Mammal Program Training Center. And we got to see the dolphins and the sea lions there. And my ex-boyfriend Alex and a couple of my friends from America, they came down to San Diego at the same time. And we got to go out on the boat to look at the whales. Specifically, we got to see big killer whales off Port Loma, Point Loma, Port Loma. I don't remember which one it is, one of those two, Port or Point. Anyway, that was an interesting experience. But the point of this area of the video, this beginning of the video, is just to inform you that I don't know where my research is going to take me next. I don't know which cliff is going to have me dive off next. But the one good thing about my handlers, though useless in almost every other capacity, is that they are typically quite indulgent in keeping me in supplies for whatever research project tickles my fancy. At least for the most part, it's still very give and take, swings and roundabouts. You get nothing for nothing kind of situation. And I always have to keep that in mind when I'm thinking about what I want to study next. But that is very much a problem for future Casey. For Casey tonight, I instead want to take you on my journey through the Pacific Northwest and the various traumas that were bedazzled and risen from that specific journey. So let's do it. For the last 3-ish years, I don't understand why. I assume it was a group delusion of sorts, group psychosis, if you will, where Nate and I have been obsessed with just driving through the American Pacific Northwest. And like I said, it is basically just a shared delusion that we both have, because we live in the Australian outback. Driving 24/7 is just part of our lifestyle. You would think that going on a road trip would be the very last thing that we would desire to do on a vacation. But no, for some reason, we're just like, wouldn't it be lovely if we could just get in a car and drive through the Pacific Northwest? Which again, I don't understand the appeal of, because we both done it before. Now for me personally, I don't know about Nate, I think for me personally, the appeal comes from the fact that the first time, and really the only time other than this recent trip that I've done it, was in my first year when I was living in the modern West. And so I didn't really have enough experience to appreciate that this was actually something really cool that we were getting to do, which wasn't helped by the fact that during that trip was some of the worst experiences. Well, not the worst, but the most random and, again, not very good experiences. Not as good as they should have been, is how I should word it. Like, for example, me and my friend Tristan, this was the trip in which we, without prior warning, were woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning and taken to Yosemite National Park to climb the Half Dome in the world's most inappropriate attire. That's the kind of trip that I'm talking about, that I previously went on in the Pacific Northwest. And so I didn't really have a great appreciation for it at the time. And the other factor that comes into play here is unpleasant to talk about, but can't be avoided, and that is the reality that between Ash, Nate, and I, we earn well in excess of $1 million a year between the three of us, which is really more than me, even though on paper I earn the most, but I get taxed at a really, really ridiculous tax rate. And so, anyway, the point is, we earn a lot of money, and we live in one of the lowest cost of living areas humanly imaginable in a developed country. So we've got the time, because we never take time off. We've got the resources, because we're not spending a whole lot. And finally, we have the right to leave, with me being granted these 4 weeks reprieve. And so we're like, what the hell? We're always talking about a road trip through the Pacific Northwest and how amazing it would be. Let's do it. Why not? Our plan was that we were going to drive from San Francisco up to Alberta, Canada, and that's exactly what we did. It was a lot of fun. It took us 2 weeks to get from point A to point B, because we took the long way around. We saw a lot of interesting places, we met a lot of interesting people, we got into some scary scenarios, and we ate incredible food, and I got really, really fat along the way. even more fatter than I already was. So that was delightful. But if you don't know anything about that specific driving from California up to Alberta, it's very ocean heavy. There is nothing else on that drive to entertain yourself with other than giant trees and the Pacific Ocean. That's it. You are just eye to eye with water 24/7. And you know, Nate's driving because he's a van lifer. I'm not a van lifer. He lives in a van, and I'm not driving a van. He's driving the van. Ash isn't driving the van because Ash gets car sick, and so he has to sit in the front and, you know, look out the window. And so Nate is driving the entire way, and he's getting that condition where you're on the ocean for so long that you can't see land anymore. You're sea blind. He is sea blind to what he is doing, which is not a particularly safe environment to be driving in. But again, I'm not driving this van. And you know, once you start getting sea blind, you also start getting sea delusional. And so a few days into just being eye to eye with the Pacific Ocean all the time, he starts talking about how tsunamis and how we can see a tsunami coming on the distance and we should probably drive faster. And as he's saying that, it's like a light switch has gone off in my head, and I was like, oh my God, do you know what? I've never told Nate this story before. I've never told you this story before either. I've survived a tsunami before. And he's like, no, you haven't. And it was like, no, I'm dead serious. I have. And he's like, no, because you would have told me if you had. I was like, you're right. I would have told you, but I forgot about it. I literally have not thought about it in years and years and years. And it's odd to think about, not just the tsunami experience in and of itself, but the fact that I forgot about it for so long, because it was a formative experience in my life in that had the tsunami never happened, I would have never gone to the second war. And so if I'd never gone to the second war that I was involved in, I wouldn't be sitting right here, right now, talking to this camera, or in that van, talking to Nate along the Pacific Northwest in some rural part of Oregon. And so I guess the argument could be made that the tsunami that I experienced when I was, how old, 17, 18? I don't remember the exact date. Well, I think I was 17. In fact, I'm 99.999% sure that I was 17. But had I never experienced that tsunami when I was 17 years old, that tsunami is fundamentally responsible for everything bad that has ever happened in my life. My tsunami experience is that I had my first baby when I was 17, and I got pregnant at the first war, which was in my neighboring country. And the first war had ended, and I was married, and I was pregnant, and I was 17, and I was heavily, heavily pregnant when the first war ended, and I went home with my mother to my own home country, which was next door to this country, and my husband, he didn't really remain in that country. Him and my best friend went traveling for a little while, so they weren't in that country themselves, and I was really resentful of that specifically, on top of a lot of other things. I think I had really bad postnatal depression. But anyway, again, I'm 17, I've gone home, and it is now May. It's a beautiful, beautiful May day, and we have been invited to a high society wedding, a very, very important wedding. It was the wedding of the son of the mayor. Was he the mayor, or was he? It doesn't matter. He was a high-ranking politician in the country that we were living in, and we'd been invited to his son's wedding. And my mother made me go. I did not want to go to this wedding because I felt disgusting. I had just given birth. Prior to me giving birth and breastfeeding, I had never had boobs before in my life, despite being 17. I had little fashion boobs at that point in my life, and I wanted those back. I felt disgusting. I didn't want to be seen by anybody, high society or low society. It didn't really matter. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to lock myself in my room and just become invisible. But my mother and my grandmother forced me to go, so we went to this beachside resort, and we were on the 6th floor, and the ceremony was literally about to start, or it was just in process, and I refused to come out of the bathroom because I felt all my clothes didn't fit me correctly, like they didn't sit right, and I didn't want to be seen, again, by anyone. So I've locked myself in the bathroom with my baby, and my mother and my grandmother are there, like, screaming at the door and knocking on the door, trying to get me out so we can go downstairs to this ceremony that's happening on the beach. And as they're doing that, the window starts vibrating. I'm like, what is that? It's almost like an earthquake. I think most people have experienced like a minor earthquake. It was like that. I'm like, oh my God, is there an earthquake? And so I go to the window and I look out the window and you can see the beach because we're right on the beach. It's a beachside resort and all the trees just start like bending over. So I go to the window because there's a balcony off the bathroom and I look out and you just see this this wall of water just pouring in full speed ahead. There are people at this point screaming. You can hear things smashing into other things. It's very loud, but also very quiet at the same time. It's a very eerie experience. And so at this point, that wave comes, everything, it's like a water slide. There is just huge currents and it's disgusting. The water at this beach was the most beautiful blue that you've ever seen in your life, like a turquoise blue. And now it just looks brown and shitty. So the water looks gross. Everything looks gross. You can see people who are no longer amongst the world of the living, floating and being pushed around in the water. And the water is like rising. We're on the 6th floor. The water is rising up to the 4th floor and then the 5th floor. Luckily, it didn't get to the 6th floor. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But people think that this, like, tsunamis are just a one-wave event. They're not a one-wave event. There were multiple waves over about a 12 to 14-hour period. They were consistent. Every, 20 to 40 minutes, there would be another wave. And some of the additional waves were actually bigger than the first wave. And so we were stuck in that resort suite for 2 days before we could leave, which in and of itself was probably the worst part of the experience for me because, again, we didn't get wet at all. We just, we had to ration whatever food and water we had, and I also had this little baby, and I wasn't happy about it. But I think, again, going back and looking back right now, I think part of my dissonance about it is that I was just in a bad mental state already with postnatal depression. And so it was like, yeah, well, this makes sense. This is exactly what's happened. The bride is dead because the bride did die in this specific wave, incident, which was tragic. But yeah, I didn't care at that point in time. I was just like, well, I just want to leave this resort and go home. So after 2 days, we did get to leave and go home. And I was at home for a little while, and it was just, there was a lot of injuries and a lot of sickness because a lot of the drinking water got contaminated, and there was a lot of damage to certain properties around the city because the city was not far from the shore. You can see the shore from most of the city. And so they took some water damage as well, not as much as the frontline resort did, but they still took some damage. And so my mother sent me back to my husband's country. And then when my husband and my best friend came back, I was very resentful. And my best friend, or my husband, I honestly don't know which one. One of them was like, well, why don't you come on the next journey that we went on? And I was like, yes, that sounds like a great idea. I would leave my baby here to be taken care of because we were only planning to be gone for a couple of weeks. And we ended up being gone for 10 months because we got caught up in a war in the other country and couldn't get home again. So that was my tsunami experience. And had that not happened, I would have never have gone back to my husband's country, and I would have never gotten caught up in war, and I would have never met A, and I would not be here right now talking to this camera. So huzzah. Do you know how much trauma you have to have experienced in life to forget that you experienced a tsunami, a deadly tsunami? I mean, I don't know how much trauma, but I assume it's a lot. And this was by no means a small tsunami. Like I said, the bride died. She died. And I don't think her body was found for a while. When they found her, she was, cooked and waterlogged. But because of everything that I've experienced in life, before and since, it doesn't even break the top 10 of the most traumatic experiences of my life. I think it would probably struggle to break the top 50, if I'm to be completely honest. My mind just does not consider it to be an event worthy of remembrance in any capacity, obviously, because I haven't thought about it in years and years and years, which is very, I don't want to say funny, but definitely strange to think about, because I think for most people, at least in the modern West, it would be the grand trauma of their entire lives. But for me, there's just so much competition for the worst trauma of my life that it's just not going in there. It's just not registering. There's no, unless someone brings up the word tsunami to bring it to the forefront of my mind, it's just like, poof, away I go, off with the fairies, off to Neverland, that kind of thing, because it's got to compete with a lot. I've been through total war and civil war, and I had a childhood essay that was quite brutal, and then an additional 2 wartime essays, which were also unpleasant in their own way. One in particular, very, very unpleasant, which is why I don't talk about it, not so much for my sake. I have no problem talking about it, but it's one that I think a lot of other people will have problems hearing. I've experienced child loss and forced adoption, and my mother and my husband, and I lost my home all in a singular night. And then I got exiled for the very first time for 11 years to an island with only 2 other people, both of whom were quite mentally unwell and unstable at that specific moment in time. And then just as I was finding my feet again, I get exiled here for a further 11 years so far, but then again, who's counting? And then there was that time that I got stabbed in the eye. That was fun. But, you know, it's just, it is a lot for a wave to contend with. I have got so much cumulative trauma that I don't even get to have PTSD. I have been traumatized into high functionality. Hyperfunctional trauma containment is the technical medical terminology for it, which is a lovely description. My nervous system has dropped right past freeze and into permanent dorsal vagal collapse, which is a very, very kind way of saying that my brain has permanently blown its emotional fuse. And so I could quite literally walk past an atrocity on the streets, the most bloody, gruesome atrocity that you could think of. How I could walk past the place where my child died and my heart rate would not rise 1 beat. It would remain completely steady across the board. In fact, trauma just so happens to make me work harder and think faster and handle crises better than literally anybody that you can care to name. So isn't that just a fantastic reward for a lifetime of bullshit? They won't even let me have therapy. Do you know that? They will not let me have therapy. I can ask them and they will say no because they're scared of poking the frickin' bear. In my case, they practice something that is called benign neglect. Basically, if a psychological defense mechanism is keeping somebody employed and functional and sane, then you just let them be. You don't mess with things that are keeping the trains on the tracks. They believe that my brain has constructed some kind of enormous industrial-grade firewall for a reason, and if some well-meaning but idiotic psychologist was to come around and try to tear down that firewall and feel my feelings, they wouldn't be curing me of anything. Instead, they would be sending a giant tidal wave of emotions to flood my nervous system, which hasn't been adjusted to experience it since I was a teenager. It is basically the human equivalent of, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. When a normal trauma patient undergoes therapy and intervention, what they're trying to do is they are trying to return to the normal safe person that they were before the trauma occurred. It is building a bridge. Whereas in my case, there is no bridge to go back to. I was thrust into war and exile an entire lifetime ago. I have absolutely no adult memories of a safe and predictable world. So if you strip away my identity as a hardened, hyper-functional survivor, there is no old self hiding underneath. There is just a void and maybe a couple of dragons. So if you try to force me to confront that trauma, simply erase the only version of me that I know how to be. At least that's how it's explained to me. I am an N1 case, darling. I am an N1 site case, which is why I have to go to Melbourne every 3 months like clockwork, or at least I'm supposed to into, I recently stopped doing so last year, and I have no intention of going again, but that's why they take me down there and study me and poke me and all that good stuff. So I finished filming this video like 2 hours ago, but I just remembered that I've been in a shipwreck 3 times, and a flippin' blimp crash. Who has been in a blimp crash? There aren't even any blimps left in the world. I think there's like 5 blimps left in the world. But the first ship crash that I was in is actually one of my favorite stories, and I feel like I have told it at some point on this channel before. But basically, me and my husband, we had to go, when we got married for our wedding, we had a really famous singer, and I actually have one of her albums. Dress Levac gave me one of her albums, so I do have it here. If I remember, I will put it in here, because it's not copyrighted, obviously. But she came and she sang at our wedding, and she had retired like a decade before this point. So it was a very, very big occasion, because we had over 1,000 people at our wedding. But I didn't get to really see her, because my husband and my best friend had gone off to do the Devil's Tango. And so I was in my best friend's house with the elders because his community had elders. And because they were doing the Devil's Tango upstairs, I was sitting in the dining room with these elders. And so I was sitting there playing Jim Rummy, and I didn't get to see the singer. And I was always really disappointed about that, because clearly I couldn't go out, because people would have asked me where my new husband is, and I couldn't say, well, he's upstairs with my best friend. And so I had to miss it. And then about 5 years after our wedding, she was doing a charity concert in a different country. And so we had to get a ship there, which was all fine. We went, we saw it, it was great. But then on the way home, we got stuck at Ocean for 4 days. And then the ship did a Titanic and broke. And we had to get on we had to put on the life jackets and get on the little boats and sail out for about 3 hours until we got picked up, which was really annoying because it was really, really cold. And my husband had been drinking cocktails all night, and he was drunk, and he was a really loud, happy drunk, which was just not conducive to the environment of a sinking ship.